everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Language Lounge. My name is Michelle Ola, and today I'm here with Stephanie Carbonneau, a French teacher from Maine that I am really excited to talk to because I have followed you on Twitter, seen you. I want to say I've seen you at conference presentations. We run in the same kind of circle, and so I've heard your name for a while, but we haven't had a chance to sit down and talk, and I'm really excited to do that today. Stephanie, why don't you start by just giving us a little bit of the context of your teaching history, circumstance, where you are, what you do, and who is Stephanie? We'd love to introduce yourself to us.
So I'm actually entering my 26th year of teaching. I thought it was 25, but I don't know. I guess math is not my forte.
You missed your big 25th year celebration?
25th celebration. I don't know if the pandemic threw me off or what. So I've been teaching middle school French for 26 years. I started in Massachusetts because I went to school in Massachusetts for college, and then returned home to Maine. And I've been at the same school in Maine for almost 20 years now.
Okay. Wow. So let me ask you, what made you want to learn French? I always am curious about people's stories of how they got started.
My family is Quebecois. My mother was raised speaking French in a time when she actually went to elementary school, and she didn't speak English really well until high school. But she never taught us French because
common story, right?
Yes, it was lost with her generation. So I was very interested in that from that aspect, and also because I was a dancer, and ballet was completely in French, and it really did intrigue me. So it was something I loved. It was not something I was good at. It was actually probably my worst grades in school were in French.
I love that.
And even in college. But I continued because I loved it, and I really wanted to learn it.
I love that for a couple of reasons. One, I think everybody, when you love something and are passionate about that, and, again, we could go into a whole conversation about grades, right? And how that doesn't necessarily translate into what what things we love. And I think that's wonderful. I'm glad you kind of followed your path, right? And didn't let barriers get in your way from really loving that.
And I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but I didn't know what I wanted to teach. And the more I struggled in those classes, particularly in college, I knew that if I was struggling, other people were struggling. And I once heard a teacher say that she was hired as a math teacher because she was not very good at math herself and would be able to sympathize with the students. Yeah. So I was like, hey, I'll know exactly
so true, right?
So maybe I'll be good at helping them be better than, I was. So
I think there's a lot to that. I think there is. I think there's a lot to that gives you a different perspective, right? I know when I was in my college prep program, same thing. There was a gentleman there he's like, I was the worst student you can ever imagine. He's like, I really did not fit into any of those sort of things. And that's why he wanted to be a teacher, right? Because then somebody is representing those. I think that's awesome. I think that's a great perspective. So that's great. 26 years. Well, that's pretty amazing. An amazing accomplishment. So that kind of leads into something that I thought would be fun for us to talk about. And that is so first of all, I love your Twitter profile, your, whatever it's called, your headline. I don't know what they call it on Twitter, your about thing. First of all, I did have to ask you a question. It says, MSFR, MATL. What is MATL?
So I have a master's in teaching languages.
See, a new acronym that I didn't know. So that's great.
Yeah, I knew after my first year, I knew during student teaching that I had no clue what I was doing, that the teacher preparation program only prepared you to be a teacher, but not necessarily to teach your content area. And some of my friends who were in elementary, they had programs about how to teach math, how to teach reading. It was nothing like that. I took one course. It was a seminar while we were student teaching with a college professor who was a Spanish professor, my favorite professor, but she did not have an education background.
Mm-hmm.
So we would teach and then come after school to our seminar and try to discuss like ways to teach a language, but nobody really knew
How?
what they were
Wow.
doing.
Yeah.
So I knew that I wanted to pursue, I had to get a master's at that time in Massachusetts. It was required within 5 years of graduating. And I knew I wanted to pursue that. So I was near Boston College, and I looked at Boston College had a master's in teaching program.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, I'll enroll there and start with that. And they didn't have any language specific courses except for one, and it was second language acquisition theory, and it was with Rebecca Vallette. I'm not sure if you remember Vallette textbook series, The Discovering French.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
And I thought, hey, if she is an author of a textbook, for French classes, this would be great. It was a great course, but it was all theory and second language acquisition. There was no put into practice. How does this look in the classroom? And there were no other courses like that. So I really started doing some digging, and I found a program at the University of Southern Mississippi, and it's a master's in teaching languages. At that time, it was summers only. You can now do it online. So I spent 3 summers going down to Mississippi and taking courses in applied linguistics, sociolinguistic culture, perspective, teaching culture, more second language acquisition. We did a lot of everything we did that summer was taken back that year and put into our classroom. And we came back the following summer and reflected on it. It was awesome. And the best class was taught by a teacher who had spent 35 years in the classroom. And we used the Shrum and Gleason book, the teacher's handbook. It really opened my eyes to a lot of how do you teach a language? What is entailed in that? And I went back and just really plugged away at that, but was still stuck in that like textbook, this is what I'm supposed to use, a textbook and teach. But I really tried hard to apply what I had learned there in that Masters of Teaching Languages program. And I really think there needs to be more programs like that for language teachers, because teaching a language is not like teaching anything else.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I think that is even becoming more and more of a challenge, as the circumstances have changed, the kind of teacher shortage. And, I'm down here in Florida, and we have alternative certification, which again, teachers may walk in the classroom without educational experience or a lot of it, and definitely not any, how to teach a world language experience. So it is something that is definitely a challenge. And but what I love, and that leads me, it's funny because that leads me to the rest of your profile, because when I'm looking at your Twitter profile, I love what it says, because I just want to read it. It says, putting student acquisition first, leading with culture, authentic resources, authors, CI, and a proficiency IPA, socially justice-based talk classroom. Like, there's so many different approaches in that Twitter profile. And that's what I really love. Like, I love your approach to just learning about lots of things and then implementing those in your classroom. So I would love to talk to you a little bit more about what, like, I would call it a very eclectic approach to language and, or to teaching. Right. And that is really that resonates with me as well. And when I look at the types of books you're putting on Twitter and the things that you're learning from those, I'd love to kind of just hear how you came to have this eclectic approach and what it looks like in your language classroom. Like, so what does, this leading with culture, authors, CI, IPA, social justice sort of classroom look like? I think lots of people would be interested in that.
So I love saying that I'm a good thief. I'm very good at learning from other people, watching what they do, taking something they've done, trying it out, and then adapting it to make it work for me and my students. Because I've learned very early on that I cannot be those other teachers, because I am not those other teachers. As hard as I would like to be, sometimes things they do aren't my style or aren't I'm not comfortable with. It's not my personality.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I can take something that they do and make it adaptable to my situation, my context, the people I work with, the students I work with. And year to year, those students are different. So something that worked the year before and
Mm-hmm.
worked really well with a group might not work with another group. Or I might have 3 classes that it works with 2 of them, but one of them doesn't. So I need to have, or I feel I should have, a toolbox of ways to teach a language and make it work for the group that's in front of me, or my situation at the time.
I love that. And somebody once kind of talk to me about this, about like putting on different hats, right? You put on a hat for a little bit and you're like, that's not quite me. I might want one that's a little bit different. It has a little bit different style. I might change something. But trying these things on. And I think, especially with social media, there's a lot of people that are really good at being them, right? And then everybody wants to kind of try and replicate that. I've done that before in the past as well, and I think there's nothing wrong with that, because that helps you figure out what kind of teacher you are, right? And if you can figure out what doesn't fit you and your students, then you can kind of adapt it to something that does fit you and your students, right? And so I think that's
I've
really
always
important.
heard and learned that, to be the best, you have to hang with the best.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean you have to do
Right.
everything they do. And, what is that quote, that you're the sum of the 5 most people you hang out the most with? And
I love that.
I'm almost in that philosophy where, like, hey, if I read this book by this person and I watch this video by this person, I'm going to absorb little pieces of that resonate with me,
Mm-hmm.
and resonate with my approach on helping students acquire a language. And, like, for example, Wayside Publishing offered an amazing opportunity this summer, a scholarship, for people who had never been to a specific acquisition driven instruction conference. I've gone to lots of state conferences and
Mm-hmm.
national conferences, but nothing that was, quote unquote ADI specific.
Mm-hmm.
So I applied and I got it, and I got to go to IFLT this summer, and
Uh-huh.
it was an amazing experience. Watching teachers actually teach during the lab, and then the debrief, and then actually having a chance to practice those techniques. And I learned very quickly that I am not good at TPR. Like, I can't do the hand things and tell the story, but I love the story aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And I can apply that to something I think students really want to learn, that's culturally based in a culturally specific story or situation. And I was able to pull things from that and bring it back and try them out in my classroom and try them out with students and get feedback from students and see what they like. And one group really loved movie talk and another group
Uh-huh.
did not. So now I know, okay, with this classroom, I can continue with this approach or technique, but this group, it's not going to work for. So what am I going to do instead for them?
I love that, because I think that's exactly what is so powerful about having that kind of eclectic sort of toolbox that you can pull out based on those needs. You don't get, and I find myself at different points in my life, not just in my professional life, but even in your personal life, where you kind of get stuck in a path, right? You get stuck in a mindset, in a way of being, and this is the way I do it, and this is the right way. And I think sometimes it's hard to break out and just see different approaches and not say, oh, well, I can't do that. I'm not, that type of teacher. I'm not, I'm not that outgoing, or I'm not, whatever it is. There's no one type of way to be a world language teacher, right? There's many, many types. And so I think I love that you give yourself permission to try new things, because it can be scary to go in a different direction than you're used to, whether it's leaving a textbook and going towards more authentic resources and IPAs, or whether it's kind of giving up some of those structured things and trying more free voluntary reading, or some other sort of CI strategies, but becoming that authentic you that's teaching for those students, I think is really powerful.
And, I've been working with the TEL project and looking at their
Mm-hmm.
documents. And, Tom Sauer has tweeted out a lot about, more strength-based feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Do more of what you're good at. And
Yes,
yeah, you have to have a goal and work on something, but you don't have to work on every aspect of your teaching that is not good. Pick one small thing
absolutely.
to work on. And so I'm really trying to do what I'm good at. Um, and try something I'm not good at and learn from
Mm-hmm.
it as well, but to focus on what's going to make me me and what's going to help my students acquire language in their situation.
I love that. I am definitely a of the strength based camp. I love that. I think there's so much power in really being in that flow of where you are your best. And again, I you're absolutely right. That doesn't mean you never work on some of those things, but it's okay to work on things that you might not, you know, some growth areas, let's call them, to get it just to an acceptable level. You don't have to be the best at X, Y, or Z, right? You can just be at an acceptable level, and that's okay,
And
because
you
you've
don't have
got
to
other
go
strengths,
all in either. You don't have
right?
to go all in with something, some people are
Yeah.
willing to jump right in, but you don't have to. You can just pick one thing. I went and watched a classroom in Massachusetts, Ashley Uegari's classroom.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful.
She's deskless, and I loved the deskless aspect. And I said, I'm going to try this. I love the game aspect of it. But her language teaching is very more organic, where it's driven by what the students want to do and that part I was not good at. But
Hmm.
I'm able to take the deskless part and say, how is this going to work for me? What is
Right.
this going to help me do in what I like to do or what I'm good at doing? And so now I have a deskless classroom, but it doesn't look like Ashley's. But I was
Hmm.
able to take some aspects of her classroom and apply it to what I know I was comfortable with and what my students were used to. And again, it's just pulling what you know is going to work for your personality and your students, because it's got to work for both. I can't.
It's absolutely true. We can't get so stuck in it works for me if it doesn't work for our people that we're really trying to influence, right? It doesn't, that's not going to work either. So I love that. The other thing I saw on your, and this is kind of just bringing this around, is the quote that you for your goal for the year. So do you remember how you put your goal for the year? I think you put it in the Lang book chat, right? About common grounds, maybe, or maybe it was just a general quote, but
What about spending
yeah,
learning this year? Yeah.
yeah.
More so because I've been in the last few years, I've been presenting or putting stuff out. But I'm at a point now again where I need to take some time to learn.
Hmm.
I can learn from anybody and everyone. In my school, we have a magnifying glass program where we get these magnifying glasses and they're dropped on your desk. And when you get that, that means you need to go into someone else's classroom, observe, and leave the magnifying glass for them. And
Oh, wow.
we are asked to not go into classrooms that are of the same content that we teach.
Hmm.
And going into a math classroom and observing, you can learn something from that teacher's approach or the science teacher's approach. And, so I want to really make sure I go back to that this year is, taking some time to learn from other teachers and invest in myself, give myself a year to absorb before I push again to lead.
Yeah. And I think there is strength in leading by learning, right? I mean, because that is really, I think, an important part of being a leader is modeling learning. Like right now, just your self reflection about who you are, all of those things and talking about those things is leading, in my opinion. So I think that that's a great approach, though, to just kind of know when you need to step back and say, I've given a lot and now I need to like get some back, right? And take some things in. And I just think that the other part of that quote that you had, it talked about being a leader, or I mean a learner, over being a leader so much right now. But it also just talked about bringing what is choosing things, growing as a teacher and accepting things that are authentically you. And I think that was the part that really, really struck me. And so my question is, what have you been, how do you take in your learning? How do you have podcasts, books, articles, everything, TED Talks, observations? Are you like a avid consumer and then kind of sort through? How do you sort through all of the things that come in and then find those things? Because if you try everything, I'm sure that you read, you're going to make yourself crazy, right?
Right.
So how do you approach learning? How do you approach your learning?
If I could go to school and get paid to be a learner, I would.
You would?
That's how much I love learning about everything. Particularly, language instruction, language acquisition, things in French itself. I once heard a podcast, I believe, again, it was with Tom Sauer, about attending a conference and picking a theme and sticking to that theme rather than like jumping in and out and all over the place and getting all of this content from all different things, but then being lost and not know what to do with it. So I tend to take a book that I read or something I like, and I'm really focused on, okay, what's one thing I can take away. I'm a highlighter. So my books are covered in highlighting, but then I go back through that highlighting and say, okay, I can't do this all. What's one thing I'm going to try? And that's what I do. But I also, once I've read, I go find on the internet, hopefully classrooms like that have, or they put the class online, for you to watch. Yeah. And I'll observe it, and I do a lot of watching beforehand. I do a lot of thinking about it, and then I try it. And I reflect on it, and I ask the students too. I'm like, okay, hey guys, I'm trying something new today. Okay. You're going to let me know what you think. And the kids are honest.
They'll let you know.
Yeah. They'll let you know, oh, I like that, or I didn't like that. Or, so that's basically how I roll. I might hear a book in a podcast, and I'm like, that sounds interesting. I'm going to read it, and I'll either read it or listen to it while I'm commuting. And, just highlight away and then pick something that I'm going to try, from it. I used to try everything, and then that was a major failure. And I felt, I'd be I'm a horrible teacher. But just picking that one thing and just, okay, if I can do this one thing from this book or this one aspect that they're showing us and I get that, then I'll try another. But I'm trying not to force myself to try everything that I'm learning. Just picking one thing.
I think that is one of the biggest mistakes I tend to do as well, because I love to consume all of this information. And the problem with that is then you see all of your gaps, right? You see all of the places that, oh yeah, I could do better at this and this and this and this. Because the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, I think. And so the more, I look at a book about, social justice or ADHD. And it scratches the surface of then I just don't know all of this stuff. Like, here's another framework. Here's more stuff that I just don't know. And to some extent, I always feel like, well, if I can't do it fully, is it effective to do just part of it? Right. And so I get overwhelmed and overloaded and trying to do that. And I think it is definitely, for me, it is making an effort and a conscious decision that sometimes I don't like. I'm like, yeah, but I really want to try these 3 things. Right. But I'm going to really be focused because eventually, I can add those other things later. I know we both read a book. So I know you read it this summer in the pool, and it dropped in the pool, if I remember right, The Minimalist Teacher. And I love that book because that actually did help me focus on really, truly the things that matter and matter to me and to matter to, the people that I try and support. So tell me a little bit about, what is that book or other books you've been reading this summer, and what's the one thing you've gotten out of those?
So I picked up that book because of your podcast.
That's awesome.
The interviews you had done with that, and then again, Tom Sauer on there.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, I had done a blog post on, 10 things that I focus on in my classroom or routinely go back to in my classroom for activities. I looked at it again the other day and I'm like, since the pandemic, there's a few of these I have not gone back to, and I've added in other ones. But it really resonated me in that book about having routines and things that you routinely use in your classroom or continually use. And you might add in one new one here or there, but you stick to those principal, 10 activities or 20 activities that your students know will work. So that when you do try something new and you need to bail out, you've got this
backup plan, right?
Backup plan. That is something that you've honed and gotten really, really good at. And so some of those activities that I had in my original post, I'm like, nope, I never went back to them. I'm not going back to them. I'm going to change this. My whole activity list is different 3 years ago than it is today. And again, it's because of students or what I've tried and figured out that, this works better, or this is an easier way to do something. I now look at those activities when I plan and say, okay, here are these activities I always go to. Will this work with this? Okay. Yep. These will work. The kids know this. And then that gives me some time as well to try something new, because I don't have to spend all that time, explaining to the students, we're going to do this survey activity. And at the end, you're going to take the results and do this and write about the class, what your class findings. They already know because they've seen that activity.
And they've done it, right?
So many times that they know exactly what we're doing, and it frees up some time to let me try something new. And just really paring down the number of, assessments and homework. I've pretty much given up on homework and just having them practice vocabulary outside of class and focusing on keeping things streamlined and routine, that they know what's going on, they know what to predict, and not adding in all of this stuff and overwhelming them, and just really keeping it lean, which gives me the room to try something new every now and then.
Yeah, I think that's one of the messages I got out of it as well, that, adding and adding and adding becomes less effective at some point, right? Than reusing and really building that foundation. I really do recommend that book, right? I really do love it. I think it helps me. Yeah.
I got out of it too, that it was okay to let certain things go. Like, you don't have to keep doing this strategy or this activity or this game if it's no longer serving you.
Yeah.
It's okay to let it go and replace it with something else that's going to be more effective. And that was hard, say, okay, I have permission to do this. And I looked at certain things like in lessons now, that do I really need to do this anymore? Is it worth the time? Is it effective? Is it, helping my students acquire language, or is it just fun? And that was great.
If fun was its only option, fun's great. It's not like you don't have to have fun, but can I do something that combines the fun with the learning, with the, the main objectives that you want?
I think we need to be, and that book gave me permission. I think that's what teachers need, is permission to pare down and only stick to what's essential or to what works for them. Just because your colleague is, doing something in their classroom to teach Spanish or German, or doesn't mean you have to do it if it's not you, and if it doesn't fit your effective teaching.
Yeah. The other thing, and then we can move on to another topic too, but I think the other thing that talks about this, as far as learning and how you make these decisions, because, they have this triple P funnel, and I love that you put everything in the top, and then slowly we get down to like, what's the most important. And I think a lot of us teachers are overachievers, and we want to keep learning and doing and getting better. And that's fabulous. It's what makes us amazing. But you can't live up in that upper funnel if you don't start paring down. That is when you've got too many hats on, too many things on your plate, too much chaos around you. And it is, to me, I found it I'm not a minimalist in my life yet. I would love to be because I think there is value in it. But I do think it's liberating when you start cutting those things that don't serve you, and you recognize that those aren't, they might have served you at one point, but they just don't anymore. Or they might have served your students at one point, but they just don't anymore. I kind of feel like the whole pandemic and, virtual teaching and a lot of things made a lot of teachers look at what they do and think, what are the most important things, right? What are the most important things I do? But that was one of the books. What is another one that you've read recently that you might recommend, or something that you're getting something out of that you're kind of thinking about? Maybe you're not implementing it yet, but you're thinking about.
So Julie Spino talked about an ADHD book that she really liked. And it was called Managing ADHD in School, and it's evidence-based methods for teachers. And that's the thing, is you read all this theory, but like, okay, how do I do this in the classroom? And it had phenomenal things to do. And a lot of it was focusing on being proactive rather than reactive. So when you're thinking about a lesson, I'm going to be doing this activity with students, really, how is that going to affect my ADHD students before implementing it? Not like, not in the moment, oh boy, how am I going to deal with this now? But like thinking ahead. And it's that whole thinking ahead that I got out of the book, and really involving the child in being part of the lesson and focusing on, okay, they need to move. So, okay, what could I have them do that is moving, is going to honor that aspect of who they are, but still help the lesson continue and still help them learn. And one of the things I want to try is, they talked about having students like almost keep track of stuff that's going on in the classroom to help focus their attention. Mm-hmm. And I bought these clickers, like when, the little,
like numbers. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. And so I got a set of those. And one of my goals this year is with rejoinders, as we're working through adding those into our classroom, is once we hit 2 or 3 of them, to pass out the clickers to those students who need to move, who need to be touching something, and having them listening for those rejoinders. Every time it is said, click, click.
So explain real quick for those people that might be listening. I'm trying to get better at like in being aware of my vocabulary that not everybody might know. So what is a rejoinder for those that might not know what that is?
So a simple short phrase, that's reactive to what somebody is saying. That just keep the language going in the classroom and keep conversation going. So right now, the 2 that my 7th graders and 8th graders are working on are ah bon, like seriously, and
okay.
And calme-toi, chill, calm down. So
I love it.
I want to add one more in before I throw in the clickers, but then having them listen for students using those or me using them. And they like competition and they like that aspect. So involving the ADHD kids in part of the lesson that causes them to have to focus, but honors their characteristics, that they need to move, that they need to touch things, so that's something I'm planning on trying. I don't know how it'll go, but I think in a middle school classroom in competition with another class, I think it'll work out really well.
I love that. And what I love about it too is that it does have language. It is tied to language learning. The person that's checking has to hone their listening skills. Like you said, there's a little more incentive, especially for middle schoolers. I bet you they're going to love it, and there's that incentive for them to be using those words more in that sort of way. I love it. I think that's really fun. That's great. And again, what a great one tip, right? To start out. If listeners have never listened to Julie Spino talk about, neurodiversity and ADHD, it really is impactful. It really is. She spoke at our NEL Summer Summit for the last 2 years, which is the National Network for Early Language Learning. And she has, and she's done one of the podcasts that we've talked, one of my podcasts as well, but really listening to her talk about ADHD and strategies and neurodiversity is impactful. I think it's $30 to join Nell, and like it's worth it just to listen to her two sessions. She's really amazing, and she does, if you don't follow her on Twitter, she does give so many resources on many things. But I think what she adds to the field about ADHD and neurodiversity is so powerful. So I've got that book in my cart as well. So I'm going to have to get to that. So
and
awesome.
Going on something we just talked about previously about like that one tip, the other thing I do is, and I've mentioned this before about being a good thief, I will look at someone who's already doing that, somebody who's willing to share their resources. Mm-hmm. I will take their resources, examine them, and be really not critical of the resources, but critical of how it would work in my classroom, and be like, oh, I love this, but it's too advanced for my students, or I would need to tweak this. And then taking their work and tweaking it to something I know will work in my classroom, and then using it. And I always give them credit, because I've had students say, this slideshow says that that it's the Engaged Spanish classroom. This isn't Spanish. And I'm like, no, but it's her work. And do you see, I adapted from this. You can't take other people's work and not give them credit. And a lot of times I can take an idea from somebody like that and really flesh it out to my situation. And that gives me the chance to try that one thing with a safety net almost.
Yeah.
And then I can create, after that, then the ideas start flowing about how I can do that in my classroom. But usually I need that one example and see it in progress, or see it or try it out. And then I can adapt from there.
Yeah. And I think about when I started, I have been teaching. Teaching was my second career. Our education was my second career. So I haven't been as long as you have but even since I first started in 2002 or 3 or something, how things have changed. I mean, just as far as access to so many resources, so many amazing people sharing, so much content for teaching world languages. I feel, when I first started, you used your textbook because that was really it. You didn't have you might be able to go to a conference, if you knew about them, but it wasn't the same. There's so many resources, I think, now, and so many people that are sharing what they do, I feel very lucky to be, teaching and in this environment now. But I think sometimes there is too much information. And I think that is where this process of how do I take, it's actually funny because this afternoon I'm recording another episode with Maris Hawkins, and we're going to talk about conferences. And part of that is, how do you go to a conference and not be overwhelmed with all of the content, right? How do you network and meet people, and make the most of those in person, like you said, those 5 people that are really influential to you. So that's exciting. Well, is there anything else that you've got that you're working on, thinking about this year? You talked about IFLT and some of those kind of strategies and how you might adapt some of those. I'm just curious, is there any in particular that you took out that really resonated with you?
For that, definitely going slower, focusing on the Sweet 7 and or the Super 7 and the Sweet 16, and using that in classroom and pointing them out. The circling, that's something I've always struggled with circling, but I was shown a technique that now the kids are like, why do you have index cards? And I'm like, because I'm practicing a technique and a strategy, and I need to write it out. It shows them that that I'm practicing and performing, as well. And that I practice and hone my skills, to do that. So that's what I took away from that. But now I'm applying that to, the social justice that, everybody's pushing. Yeah. I don't want to say pushing, but emphasizing, because that is important, and to cultural, aspects, and bringing in, the talks.
So tell me a little more about that. I saw that in your Twitter.
Shrum and Gleason talked about it in the teacher's handbook, which I did in that master's program. But I read it as a second-year teacher and didn't quite get it. But it was, going to a workshop with Rebecca Bluewolf that it really made sense. And, talk stands for, obviously, the students are having a conversation. They're talking in the target language. The A is for accuracy, but not accuracy in the sense of grammatical accuracy in the sense of what they're saying is correct enough that their listener understands what they're saying.
Understands, right. Perfect.
And the L is for listening, that they're listening to the people talking. It's not like they're just wait for someone to stop and then they just put in their part. They're listening to what they say, that they're reacting, following up with that, and that they're kind, that they're pulling in the people who aren't participating in the conversation. So to make sure that they are part of that conversation and that they're talking at their level, rather than like helping kids see that it's okay that your responses are one word, as long as, the conversation is still going. That means you're just still at a novice level. And I just walk around and listen to the kids when they do these, and have a little system of like a plus if I hear something that's, above their level, they're saying it in a complete sentence, a dot if they're doing it, a negative, mark if they, like a minus mark, just, the pluses and tallies so that I know what they're doing. And, a double plus if they've asked a question, because that's really hard at a novice level for them to ask a question. And looking more at, are they doing these aspects of talking in the language and not necessarily the grammar or the level, because I know they're novices. So I'm looking more, are they talking? Are they doing these things with each other?
I love that. So that talk rubric is in the Galissa and Donato, I know it's in the enacting, what's it called? I don't even remember. It's a long title, but it's the core practices book, enacting.
Yeah. And it's also in the
high leverage instruction. It's in the teacher's handbook as well. Yeah. And I'll list those both in the show notes so that if people are interested, but if you do just Google talk rubric, it is very effective and it's a shorthand, kind of system. One of the reasons I really love that too, for many reasons, I love that they talk about some of those softer skills like listening and being kind, right? Because that is part of communication. And, but also you can get a lot of data, whole class data from those too. You've got all these, just a little check mark system, and you can see pretty quickly, like, ooh, my whole class is here, or, we're ready to move. They're moving on up a little bit because they're all got this sort of plus sort of system. So it's some really good data for the teacher, I think, as well as the individual students. So, that's awesome.
And knowing that novice learners, middle school learners can discuss social justice topics. Paul Sandrock said, big ideas with little words.
Yeah.
And still having them discuss school around the world or, different aspects of that, and using a word bank and keeping it small but still calling your attention to social justice issues that are happening. I'm not yet at the point of acting on them with my students, other than, small little things, but at least I'm exposing them to some social justice. And that's where I'm at, and I'm okay with it.
Right. Yeah. And I think what you just said is so important. This is where I'm at right now. You're kind of still maybe in that. I feel like I'm the same. I'm in that information gathering, processing, making sure I understand, some of these deep issues, working on myself, and then, little trickles, little sprinkles of, what I can do right now, and when I'm able and have some of the other things mastered, then I can kind of move on to that next step. So I think it's a balancing act as far as being a teacher learner. You have to balance taking in all of these new ideas. It's important that you act on some of them. Otherwise, it's just an exercise in my own curiosity, which is okay too. I'm not saying that's bad. But then balancing how much can I really do and how much can I expect of myself and my students, because I do think we can overwhelm our students with all of the stuff as well, right? So I
Exactly.
love that. I love that. Well, anything else that you would like to kind of wrap things up with? Some things that, you've kind of just learned about being a learner, a teacher learner. Any other advice or words, any recommendations of something you've read and are curious about that that you think other people should kind of dig into?
Well, right now I'm working on the neuroscience aspect. I read Culturally Responsive Teaching, or we had to as a school.
Okay.
Zaretta Harmond, is that?
Yep.
And then I found a book. I think you've mentioned it too.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at that UDL meets neurodiversity. I can't think
Yep.
of the title right off the top of my head. I just finished.
I just did it to upgrade your teaching.
Yes.
Neuroscience meets backwards design, I think, or something. Again, I'll put it in the show notes.
Yes,
But
and
yeah,
so that's the one I'm working on now. And really understanding the brain is like,
yeah,
why didn't they talk about this in teacher prep school? I mean, I know we
right.
did like a psychology of adolescence and that type of stuff, but really knowing the brain and how it works, and then really trying to figure out is something I'm learning right now, and I'm really, really interested in. And I'm hoping there's going to be a lot of that at Actful, because I
Yeah.
think where my focus might be.
Very cool. So I don't know if it was Actful. It all blends to me, but I did a presentation on the Upgrade Your Teaching book, essentially. I also did one on differentiation in your brain, which is another really good book. I'll put that in the show notes as well. Where again, it's kind of things you already know, like about differentiation, but you don't know why it's important. And when you really hear about the connection to that, it's not just a nice to have, it's our brains need this sort of stuff. And again, I think, like you said, taking the aspects that work for world languages, for second language acquisition, that go together and work together with that is, it can be very powerful to reach out of our, one body of research knowledge and kind of bring in some of these other things, to help us too. So that's a really good one too, the differentiation in the brain. I think that's Tomlinson and Sosa.
Yes,
I think.
or Tig and
McTeagan. Yeah, that one's the Upgrade Your Teaching. I think we'll put them in the show notes. I can't remember. I didn't have my list. handy, but yeah.
one thing.
So you're really working on that
Yeah, is
neurodiversity in that part of it. So
yeah, because I think it's fascinating,
I
and
think so too.
it makes sense sometimes when you look at the kids. You're like, oh, that's why
Yeah.
what I'm asking you to do isn't working, because that's not how your brain works.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much. So why don't you give everybody your Twitter handle? I'll let you do that, and so they can reach out. You post some amazing questions and ideas on Twitter. That's where I've mostly seen you. I don't know if you're on Instagram or any place else where people can find you, but where can everyone find you on Twitter?
I am, and it's all the same handle, but I'm more focused on Twitter. It's just at the @ symbol and that Madame Carbonneau, but it's MME Carbonneau.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I will list that along with a little biography in the show notes as well. And you're participating in the Lang book chat that's going on right now about Common Ground as well, right? And I would encourage people that are listening, if it's still going on when this episode plays, which I think it will, because it's a couple weeks. Or the great thing about Twitter is it's all still there, right? All those big questions and all of those responses are still there. And I know personally, I'm a Twitter lurker. And so I watch, but I'm not super participatory. I got to figure out TweetDeck and stuff like that so that I can manage all those Lang books, Lang chats. But I learned so much from those amazing people that participate in that. So awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. It's been a treat talking with you. I've loved listening to what you are kind of thinking and what you are working on. And I look forward to, are you going to be at Actful?
I am.
Well, good. Well, I hope we can meet in person. It'd be lovely to see you. And I'm sure a lot of listeners would love to connect as well. So wonderful. Well, you have a wonderful rest of your school year.
Thank you. I'll look forward to seeing you at Actful.
Yay. Thanks. Have a good one.